The Galactic Council Hall was massive, towering, and unlike any structure humans had ever seen, a circular chamber with platforms rising high and wide, filled with leaders of dozens of alien empires, each more imposing than the last, their bodies, shapes, and colors varying in ways that made humans feel small, insignificant, and yet uniquely observant, and tension hung in the air like thick electricity before a storm, crackling invisibly, touching everyone in the room with nervous energy. Because humans had been invited to negotiate peace after decades of interstellar conflict that had left countless worlds scarred, fleets shattered, and alliances broken, and now every eye was on the small human delegation, a group so few in number, so fragile in appearance, that most alien leaders whispered to one another, mocking their size, questioning their ability, assuming they were weak, naive, and unprepared for the gravitas of this moment, while the humans themselves remained silent, calm and steady, taking in every movement of the council members, every gesture, every shift in expression, every subtle change in posture, as if they were reading a language no alien had intentionally taught, and among them stood one young woman named Alara, who moved like a shadow through the small group, her eyes sharp, her mind alert, noting the glint of hidden weapons tucked beneath armor, the tension in claws, tentacles, and limbs, the slight adjustment of chairs, the hushed whispers, the quiet gestures of those who tried to hide their fear or excitement, and even the patterns in the council lighting, the shifting of energy flows across the floor, and the subtle vibrations in the air that carried through the hall, and her calm presence contrasted sharply with the nervous energy around her, a small figure in the center of an immense assembly, yet with a quiet authority that drew the attention of anyone who dared to look closely, and as the council elder, a massive creature, with scales glinting like molten metal, cleared his throat and called for silence. The room fell instantly still, a silence so deep that it seemed to make every heartbeat louder, every breath sharper, and every tiny sound from distant corridors echo like thunder, and the aliens, expecting the usual polite, measured speech from humanity, anticipated a routine address, perhaps a few humble words about cooperation, mutual benefit, and peace, words designed to placate, to smooth tensions, and to assure everyone that humans were willing to follow alien protocols and defer to centuries of experience that they clearly lacked. And then, slowly, deliberately, Alara rose, her movements calm, fluid, and precise, drawing every eye in the chamber, her small frame commanding attention in ways that no one expected, and as she stood, a hush fell over the room, deeper than any silence before, as if the collective breath of hundreds of species had been held simultaneously, waiting for what this human, so underestimated, would say or do, and in that moment, her calm presence radiated confidence, authority, and intelligence, a presence that made even the largest and most intimidating beings in the hall pause, reconsider, and glance at one another with unease, and every movement she made was deliberate, every glance calculated, scanning the chamber without haste, without distraction, noting the placement of each alien, the proximity of weapons, the subtle alignment of their limbs, the flicker of their eyes, the tension in the joints, and the patterns of their breathing, as if she were mapping not just the room but the minds of those within it, and though she had not yet spoken, the weight of her observation settled across the council like a silent command, quiet but unshakable, and the room waited, hundreds of beings poised, unsure whether to speak, react, or retreat, because no one could predict what she would do next. And even the council elder hesitated, sensing that this small human woman carried with her a presence that could shift the balance of power, a presence that was calm yet undeniable, simple yet precise, ordinary yet extraordinary in the same breath, and every alien, whether they admitted it or not, felt a stirring of caution and curiosity, wondering if the humans had been underestimated all along, if their small delegation hid strength beyond comprehension. And as Alara finally opened her mouth to speak, the tension seemed to double, filling the chamber with expectation, the sound of her voice not yet heard but imagined, a sound that would soon shatter centuries of fragile peace, for in that instant, every whisper of doubt, every mocking glance, every assumption of weakness that had floated through the room evaporated, replaced by attention, fear, and curiosity, and even as she breathed, even as her lips moved in the first syllable, the weight of the moment pressed upon every leader, every council member, and every observer, and the small human, who had seemed unremarkable just moments before, now commanded the entire hall with nothing but her presence, her mind, and her calm calculation, and the room held its collective breath, knowing that what she was about to say would change everything, that the fragile peace they had clung to might break with a single sentence, and no one, not one being present, could have predicted the intelligence, courage, and authority that humanity had brought to the council in that quiet, deliberate rise, and in those long moments before her words, the chamber felt the tension of an entire galaxy suspended, waiting for the voice that would either save it or unravel it completely, and in that silence, Elara's eyes scanned the hall one final time, her mind racing with strategy, analysis, and foresight, knowing that the moment she spoke, peace would be tested, alliances questioned, and every species would realize that humans were not to be underestimated, that a single human could stand in a room full of galaxy leaders and command attention, control outcomes, and shape the fate of thousands of worlds, and the Council, once full of confident voices and self-assured beings, now trembled quietly under the weight of that presence, waiting for the first word that would echo across the galaxy, marking the instant when centuries of fragile diplomacy teetered on the edge of chaos, and the moment had arrived. And silence itself seemed to hold its breath as Elara prepared to speak. Minutes passed after Elara's rise, and a tension unlike any the Council had ever known began to spread through the massive chamber, for as she stood silently, observing every alien, every gesture, and every hidden weapon, whispers began to ripple like currents beneath the surface of the assembly, subtle at first, then louder as the aliens began noticing things they had ignored before, small anomalies that now seemed urgent and dangerous. The glint of concealed blades, subtle energy fluctuations in concealed devices, shadows that moved where no one should have been, and faint traces of signals pulsing through the air, all of which suggested that something had been hidden from the Council, something dangerous that humans had now detected, and Elara's calm gaze shifted slowly from one side of the hall to the other, noting reactions, measuring tension, calculating risks, and observing how quickly each alien moved, how nervous their claws, tentacles, wings, or limbs trembled ever so slightly, as if they sensed that the humans, or at least one human, knew far more than they had assumed, and the Council members who had been confident moments before began to glance at one another with unease, shifting in their seats, their long histories of politics and diplomacy failing to protect them from a sense of vulnerability that Elara had already identified and was ready to exploit, and while no human had spoken a word yet, the hidden threat was becoming clear. The aliens had built their empires on assumptions about weakness, underestimation, and control, but humans had quietly observed, calculated, and now held knowledge that could destabilize the fragile structures of power they had relied upon for centuries, and Elara's mind moved swiftly, connecting dots, predicting reactions, and preparing to reveal what she had learned in a way that would leave the Council scrambling to regain balance, and the aliens, sensing something had shifted but unable to identify what it was, felt a new kind of fear creeping in, one born not of immediate danger but of unseen strategy, the kind that humans had quietly mastered, and as minutes stretched, every leader became more alert, more tense, noticing subtle changes in the chamber, flickering energy, micro-adjustments in the environment, minor mechanical signals that had gone unnoticed, all of which confirmed the hidden threat that only humans, or specifically Elara, had detected, and this realization caused murmurs of disbelief to spread among some of the alien delegates, fear creeping into voices that had always been confident, because it became clear that the humans were not simply observers or weak negotiators. They were aware, intelligent, and capable of seeing what others could not, and every movement Elara made seemed to emphasize this knowledge without her needing to speak, for her posture, calm demeanor, and quiet observation broadcasted power, control, and readiness in a way that unsettled the entire assembly. And as she subtly shifted her stance, scanning for the smallest signs of threat, every alien weapon, every hidden device, and every potential trap seemed to register in her mind instantly, as if she were mapping the room in a web of calculations and possibilities, and the more the aliens realized that humans had noticed what they had tried to hide, the more nervous they became, unsure of how to act, how to respond, or how to regain the advantage they had assumed was theirs, and in that moment, the hidden threat became undeniable. Humans were no longer underestimated, and the Council's fragile peace was already beginning to fracture, for knowledge is power, and Elara now had power that could reshape the entire room, influence the decisions of countless alien empires, and shift the balance of authority in ways they could not anticipate, and while the room seemed calm on the surface, tension built like a coiled spring, every alien leader feeling the silent pressure of scrutiny, the quiet observation of a human who knew far more than anyone had thought possible, and though no action had yet been taken, every subtle movement and every glance from Elara carried weight, and as she prepared to speak, to reveal the knowledge that would shock the Council, the chamber seemed to hold its collective breath, the air thick with expectation, fear, and the awareness that the humans had uncovered secrets, weaknesses, and dangers that the Council itself had ignored or hidden, and even the most experienced generals and diplomats could feel it. The calm, calculated human standing before them was no ordinary delegate, no ordinary negotiator, but a master of observation and insight, a force that could undo centuries of careful alliances and fragile agreements, and every subtle reaction from the aliens, every twitch, whisper, and glance, confirmed that the hidden threat was real. That humans were no longer passive participants in galactic politics, but players who had seen through the illusions of power, who had detected the dangers everyone else had missed, and whose next words, actions, and decisions could change the future of the galaxy. And as the seconds ticked by, the atmosphere became nearly unbearable, the combination of silence, observation, and tension creating a pressure so intense that every being present felt it pressing on them, knowing that the peace they had relied upon could vanish with a single word, a single movement, a single revelation, and Alara, calm and unshaken, seemed to carry the weight of that moment effortlessly, poised to turn the hidden threat into a reality that would redefine everything the Council had believed about humans, intelligence, and power. And as she finally lifted her head, preparing to speak, the chamber waited, every eye locked on her, every mind aware that the hidden threat was no longer hidden, that the balance of power was about to shift, and that when Alara's voice finally broke the silence, the galaxy would never view humans the same way again. The moment Alara spoke, her voice was calm, steady, and carried a weight that seemed far beyond her small human frame, and the words she chose cut through the thick tension in the council chamber like a blade, revealing knowledge that no alien leader had expected humans to possess, secrets of hidden fleets, forbidden weapons, covert operations, and political betrayals that had been kept from public view for decades. And as she spoke, the council members gasped, their previous confidence evaporating instantly, replaced by a growing sense of fear and disbelief, for no one had imagined that the humans, often dismissed as weak or simple, could see so clearly, understand so deeply, and command attention so decisively. And some alien delegates tried to interrupt, to argue, to dismiss her claims as exaggeration or misinterpretation, but Alara anticipated every objection, countering with precise evidence, detailed intelligence, and logic that left even the most experienced diplomats speechless, and the whispers of fear and surprise grew louder, spreading through the chamber like wildfire, as leaders realized that humans had uncovered the truths they had tried to hide, truths that threatened not only individual empires but the delicate balance of galactic power itself. And the council hall, which had been silent with polite expectation before, now buzzed with tension, murmurs, and frantic calculations. For every alien leader had to rethink everything they had assumed about humans, about strategy, and about trust. And while the chaos unfolded, Alara remained calm, standing tall, scanning the room with eyes that missed nothing, noticing who shifted nervously, who glanced at their neighbors, who tightened their grip on concealed weapons, and who tried to hide their panic behind formal gestures and hollow reassurances. And with each subtle reaction, she adjusted her tone, her phrasing, and her focus, ensuring that the impact of her words would resonate fully, striking at the hearts and minds of those who had underestimated her species. And as she continued, the council chamber became a stage for revelation, with every secret exposed, every hidden intention revealed, and every alliance questioned. And the alien leaders who had laughed at humans moments before now felt an unfamiliar vulnerability, realizing that they had misjudged a species that had quietly observed, learned, and prepared, while they had assumed humans were simple, untrained, and powerless. And some delegates, pale in color, trembling in tentacles, or stiff in posture, whispered to their aides, asking if the information could be true, if humans had really seen what they had tried so desperately to conceal, while others tried to maintain composure. But the tension in their eyes, the stiff gestures, and the nervous glances betrayed them, for the impact of Alara's speech was undeniable, and even the council elder, who had called the chamber to order, paused mid-sentence, realizing that the humans had not come simply to negotiate but to command, to challenge, and to reshape the entire political landscape of the galaxy. And as the minutes stretched on, the shock of the revelations began to ripple outward, influencing conversations in private chambers, in hallways, and in distant fleets, where commanders and generals now questioned every alliance, every plan, and every assumption about the humans they had once ignored. And yet throughout it all, Alara remained poised, her calm face betraying no emotion beyond careful calculation, showing neither arrogance nor triumph, only focus, awareness, and a quiet command of a situation that could have overwhelmed anyone else. And as she concluded, the council hall erupted into murmurs, whispers, and hurried discussions, some delegations leaning toward their allies, others standing stiffly, uncertain how to respond. And the fear in the room was palpable, for the humans, long underestimated, had proven that they were capable of seeing, knowing, and acting with intelligence and precision beyond what anyone had imagined. And every leader in the chamber understood, whether they admitted it or not, that the fragile peace they had taken for granted was now in jeopardy, that alliances could crumble, that fleets could clash, and that the galaxy might never return to the way it had been before. And as the council members struggled to regain composure, to assess the accuracy of the information, and to plan a response, Alara quietly returned to her seat, her presence still commanding attention, her mind already calculating the next steps, and while the room buzzed with fear and uncertainty, she had achieved what no one had expected. She had shocked the entire council, exposed hidden threats, and revealed that humans were far more capable, intelligent, and dangerous than anyone had imagined, and as the delegates whispered among themselves, nervously checking communications and scanning data, they realized that the galaxy had misjudged an entire species, that a single human could challenge centuries of power, that their fragile peace was already beginning to crack, and that the moment Alara had spoken would be remembered for generations as the instant when the universe learned that humans were not to be dismissed, underestimated, or ignored, and in that instant, the council hall, once a place of polite diplomacy, had become a theater of revelation, shock, and suspense, leaving every alien present to wonder what the humans, guided by the calm and fearless Alara, might do next, and whether the fragile balance of the galaxy could survive the intelligence, courage, and resolve of a species that had quietly risen to command attention and respect. The moment of shock passed, but the council chamber was far from calm, for the revelation that Alara had delivered had unsettled every alien present, creating tension that could be cut with a blade, and whispers turned into mutters, mutters into arguments, and arguments into open accusations, as leaders and delegates pointed fingers at one another, some claiming betrayal, some questioning loyalty, while others accused allies of hiding secrets, and the once orderly assembly became a chaotic scene of fear, suspicion, and confusion, with every gesture amplified, every whisper carried weight, and every glance interpreted as a threat, and yet through all the noise, Alara remained composed, standing with perfect posture, her eyes scanning the hall, noting every subtle movement, every twitch of limb, every small shift in stance, as if she could read thoughts before they were spoken, and her calm presence acted like a magnet, drawing attention without effort, controlling the flow of chaos simply by observing, and while drones hovered above, weapons partially drawn, and security teams tensed, unsure whether to intervene, Alara analyzed the situation with a quiet precision that no alien could match, anticipating their responses, predicting the next move of each delegate, and calculating the potential outcomes of every argument, and when a particularly aggressive alien ambassador tried to speak over her, demanding proof or retracting accusations, Alara's eyes locked onto him. Her voice calm yet firm, cutting through the noise like a precise instrument, addressing the concerns logically, systematically dismantling every objection without raising her tone, without showing anger, and the alien, confident a moment before, froze, unsure how to respond to a human who had anticipated his every reaction, and as more delegates attempted to regain control, the chamber itself seemed to vibrate with tension. For the fragile structure of diplomacy was breaking, alliances tested, friendships questioned, and centuries of carefully constructed trust threatened by the intelligence and presence of a single human, and as Alara continued her methodical observation, she noticed other hidden threats, small devices, subtle weapons, coded signals, that the council had overlooked in their panic, and she made mental notes, ensuring that she could neutralize or expose them at the right moment. A strategy the aliens could not see, for they assumed humans were naive, weak, or unprepared. And as the murmurs and disputes escalated, the council security forces began to shift uneasily, unsure whether to protect delegates, intervene, or follow the humans' lead, and Alara's calm eyes tracked every hesitation, every misstep, ready to exploit them if necessary, while her voice, when she finally spoke, was measured, authoritative, and filled with a quiet power that forced the aliens to pause, listen, and reconsider. For her words carried weight not through volume or aggression, but through precision, logic, and undeniable intelligence, and the room, once confident in its order and structure, now seemed fragile, as if the entire council could collapse under the pressure of her presence, and as arguments flared between the alien delegates, some openly questioning loyalty, some subtly threatening others, Alara watched, calculated, and chose moments to interject, timing her words perfectly to maximize effect. Calm yet devastating in their impact, and the standoff intensified. As leaders tried to assert dominance, to regain control, or to silence her, but each attempt failed, as Alara had anticipated their moves, understood their tactics, and subtly influenced the flow of the chamber, turning confusion into her advantage, and while some delegates began to realize that the humans had been underestimated, panic set in for others, and the council's air became heavy with tension, fear, and uncertainty. A pressure so thick that even the most experienced generals and diplomats felt it pressing on them, and as minutes stretched into what felt like hours, Alara's calculated observations revealed the cracks in the alliances, the hesitation of leaders, the uncertainty of those who had assumed humans were powerless, and she knew that with patience, precision, and calm strategy, she could control outcomes, influence decisions, and ensure that every hidden threat, every subtle attack, and every plot would be exposed before it could succeed. And as the chamber reached a tipping point, the room buzzing with fear, suspicion, and quiet terror, Elara finally raised her voice in a single clear statement, directing attention, halting the chaos just enough to make every delegate aware of her control, and in that instant, the standoff reached its peak, the fragile balance of power teetering on a knife's edge, for it had become clear that the humans, led by Elara, were not simply participants in the council, but a force capable of dictating the terms of discussion, exposing threats, and challenging centuries of diplomacy. And as the aliens looked at one another, realizing that their plans had been anticipated, their secrets exposed, and their authority questioned, they understood that peace was no longer a guarantee, that the humans were a threat they had never prepared for, and that every move in the chamber from this moment on would be shadowed by the knowledge that one human, calm, intelligent, and strategic, had turned a council meant to maintain order into a battlefield of minds, influence, and suspense, leaving the aliens to wonder not what she would say next, but whether the fragile peace they had relied upon for centuries could survive the presence of a human who had risen to speak. Just when the council seemed to teeter on the edge of complete chaos, a subtle shift began to ripple through the chamber, for among the alien delegates, a small group of representatives who had quietly observed humanity's rise and influence now revealed themselves as secret allies, their presence barely noticed before, yet strategically positioned to support Elara and the human delegation. And as their intentions became clear, the council members who had assumed control now felt a deeper fear. For these hidden allies were not neutral observers nor simple participants. They were powerful, informed, and ready to act, and Elara, calm as ever, acknowledged their support with a single nod, a small gesture that carried enormous weight, signaling coordination and silent strategy. And as the hidden allies began to subtly maneuver, activating intelligence networks, intercepting communications, and neutralizing potential threats within the chamber, the council's remaining order began to crumble further, for leaders realized too late that the humans were no longer alone, that what had seemed like individual intelligence was now reinforced by a carefully orchestrated alliance, and the aliens who had doubted humanity moments before now felt trapped, exposed, and unsure of how to respond without igniting open conflict. And while the chamber buzzed with nervous whispers, tense gestures, and strategic adjustments, Elara maintained her focus, observing every response, predicting the consequences of each action, and guiding her hidden allies with subtle signals, eye contact, and precise positioning, ensuring that their efforts would be effective without being obvious. And as the council's internal communications and security measures began to falter under this quiet coordination, the atmosphere thickened with tension, uncertainty, and fear. For the fragile peace that had been carefully maintained for centuries was being tested not through brute force or aggression, but through intelligence, patience, and precise collaboration. And the alien leaders, some pale in color, others trembling in limbs or posture, realized that they had misjudged not only the humans but the unseen supporters who had waited for the perfect moment to act. And as the minutes stretched, the hidden allies moved to secure key positions, subtly intercepting devices, neutralizing potential attacks, and guiding other undecided delegates toward caution and restraint, all while maintaining the appearance of neutrality. And every move was calculated, precise, and impossible for the untrained eye to detect, amplifying the sense of suspense and unpredictability. For the council had no idea that the humans were no longer isolated, that every action in the chamber was being observed, analyzed, and countered by a network of allies operating in perfect harmony with Elara's strategy. And as the room teetered between panic and confusion, the secret support allowed the human delegation to maintain authority, influence debates, and shape decisions without ever raising weapons or issuing threats, relying solely on coordination, intelligence, and the psychological impact of being underestimated. And while some delegates tried to regain control, their plans faltered, for Elara had anticipated every countermeasure, every hidden attack, and every possible move the council could make. And the hidden allies quietly ensured that nothing could succeed without her approval, amplifying her influence and power. And as the alien leaders whispered urgently to one another, some attempting to regroup, others growing suspicious of their own allies, it became clear that the balance of power had shifted, and the humans, long dismissed as weak and naive, were now central to the control of the chamber, guiding events, exposing threats, and subtly neutralizing opposition, all while maintaining calm, composure, and authority. And in that moment, the chamber was filled with tension unlike any before, for no alien had anticipated that humans could command such influence, rally unseen support, and manipulate the flow of events without drawing attention. Yet here it was, unfolding in front of everyone, and every delegate who had doubted humanity felt the gravity of the situation, realizing that peace was fragile, alliances were uncertain, and one misstep could ignite chaos, and Alara, observing everything, recognized the strength her presence and coordination had created, knowing that, with patience, intelligence, and careful guidance, she and her allies could navigate the Council through crises, expose hidden plots, and ensure that the humans would never again be underestimated. And as she finally spoke again, her voice calm but authoritative, she issued commands and suggestions that carried undeniable weight, and the hidden allies acted instantly, securing positions, disabling threats, and guiding the room toward order under her influence. And the Council, stunned and cautious, realized that the humans had not only survived the first shock but had gained a strategic advantage that could not be ignored. And as the chamber slowly settled into tense silence, every leader understood that the fragile peace was now contingent on humans, that their intelligence, coordination, and alliances had shifted the balance of power, and that from this moment on, no alien would underestimate the quiet patience, subtle strategy, and unstoppable influence of a species they had long dismissed. And the hidden allies, though small in number and discreet in action, had ensured that Alara's words and strategy carried maximum impact, changing the Council forever, proving that intelligence, foresight, and careful planning could achieve what force and authority could not. And in that chamber filled with whispers, fear, and disbelief, humans had risen to command attention, control the flow of events, and shape the future of galactic politics, demonstrating that a species once underestimated could quietly become the ultimate force. And as the Council members left with new respect, caution, and lingering fear, the hidden allies faded into the background once more, their purpose fulfilled, leaving Alara at the center, calm, focused, and fully aware that the moment they had acted together had forever changed the galaxy's fragile balance of peace. By the time the final session of the Council began, the chamber had transformed from a place of polite diplomacy into a tense arena filled with suspicion, fear, and the heavy weight of uncertainty. For centuries of fragile peace now hung by a thread, and every alien leader knew it, some whispering urgently to their aides, some glancing nervously at neighbors, and some clutching hidden weapons as if mere readiness could save them. And yet, through all the chaos, Alara remained calm, her presence unshaken, her eyes scanning the room with the same precision and quiet authority that had unsettled the Council from the very beginning, for she understood the delicate balance she now controlled, the invisible threads of influence and knowledge she had woven across the chamber, and the hidden allies who had assisted her remained strategically positioned, ready to act on the slightest signal, their presence unknown to most, their coordination invisible yet absolute. And as murmurs of doubt and accusation filled the hall, she rose once more, standing tall and deliberate, commanding attention not by force, but by the weight of intelligence, preparation, and unwavering calm. And every delegate felt the impact of her gaze, recognizing that humans, long underestimated, had now become the central axis of power in the Council, their strategy, foresight, and courage dictating the flow of events. And as she spoke, her voice clear, firm, and deliberate, every word revealed intelligence that exposed hidden plots, neutralized potential threats, and challenged centuries of assumptions about human weakness. And the Council members, even those who had doubted or mocked, froze as the reality of her message sank in, realizing that peace, as they had known it, was no longer possible, that alliances had been tested, loyalties questioned, and the fragile balance of authority irreversibly shifted. And the chamber, once orderly and calm, was now alive with controlled chaos. As leaders adjusted positions, reassessed strategies, and tried to respond to a force they could neither ignore nor fully understand. And yet, Alara's calm presence anchored the room, her calculated words guiding action, her perception of every move ensuring that no threat went unnoticed. And as the minutes stretched into tense hours, the Council understood that humans were no longer passive participants or negotiators, they were decision-makers, influencers, and controllers of outcomes, their intelligence, courage, and strategy redefining the rules of engagement. And while some alien delegates attempted to regain dominance through argument, intimidation, or whispered threats, each attempt faltered under the weight of evidence, the precision of analysis, and the quiet authority that Alara wielded effortlessly. And even the most experienced generals, diplomats, and rulers recognized that their centuries of knowledge, alliances, and tactics were being challenged in ways they had never anticipated. For humans had demonstrated a level of observation, calculation, and coordination that no alien had expected, and every subtle reaction, every shift in stance, every whisper, and every glance confirmed the end of the era of assumed control, replaced now by respect, caution, and fear. And as Alara directed her hidden allies to secure key positions, disable concealed threats, and subtly guide the chamber toward order under her influence, it became clear that peace could only continue on terms set, in part, by humans, that the fragile agreements and treaties of the past were insufficient to maintain stability, and that the galaxy had entered a new phase, one where intelligence, strategy, and courage could outweigh size, power, and reputation. And as the final motions of the council unfolded, delegates recognized that the moment humans had risen to speak, the moment Alara had taken command with calm authority and precision, was the moment that peace, as it had existed, ended, replaced by a cautious equilibrium defined not by fear of force, but by respect for intelligence, foresight, and subtle control. And as Alara quietly returned to her seat, observing, calculating, and guiding without words, the chamber understood that the humans had achieved something unprecedented. They had exposed weaknesses, neutralized hidden threats, revealed hidden alliances, and established their authority in a room that had never imagined them capable, and the hidden allies, having fulfilled their role, faded once more into quiet observation, leaving Alara at the center of a new reality, a reality where the galaxy could no longer underestimate humans, a reality where diplomacy, trust, and peace would forever be influenced by a species that had quietly mastered the art of strategy, observation, and precision. And as the council members filed out, cautious, respectful, and unsettled, the weight of the moment lingered, for they all knew that humans had changed the rules, exposed the hidden dangers, and ensured that from this day forward, no empire, no fleet, and no leader would ever assume that humans were weak, naive, or irrelevant. And the chamber, once a symbol of galactic order and fragile peace, had become a reminder that a single species, led by courage, intelligence, and calm authority, could alter the balance of power, command respect, and shape the future of the galaxy forever. And as Alara finally lowered her gaze, allowing the murmurs to fill the hall, it was clear that the moment she had risen to speak had indeed ended peace, and begun a new era, one where humans were no longer underestimated, ignored, or dismissed, but observed, respected, and feared for their capacity to see, calculate, and act with precision, patience, and strategy beyond anything the galaxy had anticipated. And in that quiet, tense, and irreversible moment, the council, the leaders, and the entire assembly understood that the end of peace was not destruction, but the rise of humans, as a central force in the fate of the galaxy, shaping every decision, every alliance, and every outcome in ways that would be remembered for generations.